Good morning. It's time for another episode of Discipleship Today. My name is Pastor Bob Benson. I pastor Christ Lutheran Church in Bemis Point. We've been using the book of John as a discipleship text. This week we're into the story in John chapter 18. We started out last week and we're going to continue in that. I'm going to read a couple of verses, just 3 verses from chapter 18, the center of the chapter, starting at verse 12, and I'm going to be reading from the ESV. So the band of soldiers and their captain and their officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. First they led him to Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. It was Caiaphas who had advised the Jews that it would be expedient that one man should die for the people. As we read this small section of scripture here, there's a lot packed into it. First of all, why did they find it necessary to bind Jesus? If he really was an insurrectionist leading an insurrection, was it possible that he would run away as they came to him? It doesn't make any sense that they bound him, other than to fulfill prophecy, and the prophecy says that he would be bound and beaten. And so I don't quite get why this band of soldiers, the captain, found it necessary to bind Jesus, especially when he surrendered peaceably. And first they led him away to Annas. And we have to know a little bit about Jewish history and about the high priest. Annas was the high priest that was appointed by Quirinius, the governor of the Syrian area. And if that name sounds familiar to you, it should. Quirinius was governor that instituted the census count when Jesus was born, the reason that he was born in Bethlehem. So he was appointed, and typically that was not an appointment that was given. It was chosen by lot from people that were descendants of Aaron directly. And so to have this political appointment and serve in that position, but he was not the high priest. This is the thing. He was replaced, first of all, by someone else, and then by his son. And then who this guy was, Caiaphas, that was serving as the high priest, was his son-in-law. But that meant that this guy had quite a bit of influence within the temple system. He had been the high priest, and it was very typical in the Old Testament that a high priest would serve for his lifetime. So that he was still around, and he still had influence in the governing of the temple. It was pretty important. And that's why he went to Annas first, the father-in-law of Caiaphas. And it says that Caiaphas served as the high priest that year. It's interesting because in the Old Testament, the high priest served for a lifetime. And in the New Testament, it was whoever held political favor would be put in that position by the Roman government to have some control over the religious happenings on the Temple Mount in Israel. And boy, you talk about the separation of church and state. Here it should have been separated, and it completely was not. And a matter of fact, I think that's what, between that and what happened with the Church of England, was what our forefathers were thinking about, that they wouldn't have any state religion. It's not freedom from religion, but it was freedom from a specific religion. We're supposed to live in a land where we're free to worship as we want to worship. So there's no state religion, but that doesn't mean that our religion should be separated from state things. I think a lot of the problems that we have today is because we've kicked God out of politics. We've kicked God out of our schools. We've kicked God out of our government. And I believe that that's part of the problem that was going on in the first century of Israel. The state had such an influence on even who served as pastors and priests in the temple, and it messed everything up. And it was Caiaphas who had advised the Jews that it would be expedient that one man should die for the people. Caiaphas, being used of God or of Satan in his place, prophesied this, that one man should die for the people. And I think that's really interesting that John records that as he's telling this story about the things that happened to Jesus, that this is important. And it was expedient that one person should die for the people, but not just for the people of Israel, but for all the people of the earth. And John records that here, and that applies to us. As believers in Jesus Christ, we call the irreducible cord, you must love God, love others, and make disciples. And that's what Discipleship Today is all about, is helping us to make disciples. So as you go, remember to love God, love others, and make disciples. For Discipleship Today, my name is Pastor Bob Benson. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me.